Navigating an SAP transformation? We get it. By day, we work hands-on with people like you across the globe. By night, we share what actually works. Welcome to Transformation Every Day with Alexander Greb and Johannes Languth, where your complex transformation becomes clear, actionable, and achievable.
Welcome everybody. My name is Alexander Greb and you're listening to Transformation Every Day, expert insights and stories on SAP and beyond. Sapphire 2026 is done. The stages are dark and the confetti is settled, and what SAP called the most consequential announcement in their history is now out in the world and waiting to be tested against reality. We are talking about the autonomous enterprise. Joule everywhere, agents for everything, definitely a bold vision. But what actually holds up 2 weeks later? What got quietly left out, and what does any of this mean for the people who have to make it work on a Monday morning? To cut through it, I called in two giants of the SAP universe who have been doing exactly that for decades. Jon Reed from Diginomica and Josh Greenbaum. Together they have close to a century of experience in this ecosystem and a shared allergy to anything that sounds good on a keynote slide but falls apart under scrutiny. So 90 minutes, no filter, real talk from the SAP community for the SAP community. This is Transformation Every Day.
You were live there already during Orlando, which is now almost 2 weeks gone. Are there certain things that, let's say, after 2 weeks of digesting, you see now different than right after the announcements were done?
I would say no, honestly. I think that there's been, there was a lot to digest. I have been digesting. It's been a long process. I feel like a snake who swallowed a horse and trying to get this through my system. But I think that in general, what we saw is what we got. There were certainly, and we'll discuss them. There's some omissions, stuff that should have been said that didn't get said. We have a couple of questions about some of the stuff that got said, but I think it's been, it was one of the better Sapphires in general, and I think the content was a very rich Sapphire in terms of content.
Definitely. Jon, your opinion?
Well, gosh, I mean, it takes me a long time to really understand like a show like that, even though I issued a whole slew of podcasts, which unfortunately you were forced to listen to in order to do this episode.
I enjoyed it.
So we don't repeat ourselves too much. But yeah, and I've been to another competing vendor show since then, and also just trying to sort of gauge sort of what you might call the reaction to the fallout. And I have a lot of content I'm writing. So right now, by the time listeners hear this, my piece on SAP's API policy will be out. And that piece has been humbling to write because of the nature of the moving targets and all of this. And, I try to be careful about saying like AI is moving really fast because at some point it feels very hypey to say that. But it is moving fast enough to cause a lot of problems with policies, for example. So since that time, I've been trying to unravel a lot of questions around MCP, which is a pretty important part of any vendor's AI infrastructure that I don't believe have been successfully addressed at this point. But I think the most interesting thing for me is just to kind of get a sense, take the temperature of the room, kind of like what you did, Alexander. I had some awesome meetings with user groups on site, and Josh was part of many of those. And that really helped to balance. But now it's time to kind of just hear from the community and what they think. And hopefully this podcast will shed some light on that. But I would say that there's a whole lot that the community had to say that I'm still trying to get a handle on. And I don't know, man. I think to deliver successful SAP projects, we're all going to be working pretty hard because I don't think we can rely on our established knowledge. In other words, like this whole idea of like, oh, you've been around SAP for 10, 20, 30 years, so you know how to deliver a successful project. Forget all about that now. If you're not doing your homework on what's happening right now, I question whether you can deliver.
Absolutely.
No, I would say there are still the basics that apply. And I think we saw, I think, some affirmation of it in terms of the blocking and tackling around change management doesn't end.
Oh, sure, yeah. And just to be clear, because Josh and I will argue about things like this, like I'm not saying that experience isn't relevant. I'm saying that if you think your experience carries you right now, I think you have to be careful. I think you have to humble yourself a little bit to what's happening, and you have to be able to finesse the new questions people are asking. Even if sometimes the answer is, well, that stuff, that agentic stuff's not even ready yet, so put that to the side. You still have to be able to explain why.
Yeah, no, that's true. And absolutely explain why is that's gotten a lot harder.
It has.
And we definitely got 1 century of experience assembled here with Jon and Josh.
I got 2, 3. You're right. Podcast. It's a bloody century's worth of, yeah. Oh my, I'm sorry to hear that.
Which is a very, very, very positive framing about our age, of course. No, great to have you guys. Perfect. We are recording. Jon Reed here, Diginomica, enterprise analyst, decades covering of SAP, and Josh Greenbaum, enterprise applications consulting, known for calling out hard truths. Always honest, always very insightful. Great to have you here. And yeah, that's what we are more or less doing today, a digestment podcast on so much content that we got fed at Sapphire. And we have collected, like I said, voices from user groups, voices from customers, voices from partners. We are actually already right in the discussion because what you said, guys, experience is fine, but we really also, of course, have to reinvent ourselves in the partner business based on what's up is more relevant than ever. And who do you think has at the moment the bigger gap to bridge? Is it the users who may look at these kinds of 4, 5, 6 technology levels that probably they have to jump to become members of the autonomous enterprise? Or is it the consultants who, probably asking themselves, Jesus, how do I make this happen?
I think it's the partners. And the reason is, and look, customers have a lot on their plates, don't get me wrong. But I think it's the partners because the entire sort of business model of the partner is completely called into question and has been for some time, and frankly, I think is overdue. And this whole notion of sort of the bread and butter of partner work being, customizations has been called out for a while now by SAP in terms of its clean core mantra. And really now you're looking at multiple transitions. And I think a lot of it is healthy. And I prefer not to think of it in an AI frame, but to think of it in a customer success frame. And how do we deliver on customer success for our customers now? And I think it's a really important question, but it often requires significant business model changes for the partner, and then mix in some of the AI stuff around what vendors like SAP are trying to do, which is to make these implementations easier to get to your point around the customers perhaps that are not on the newest stuff. And that threatens the partner business model. And at the same time, how healthy is the partner community? And is SAP doing all it can for partners? That's a can of worms.
Yeah, well, you just set me up. Look, and I want to set the stage though about the partner discussion very carefully because we use the word partners, and there's really a taxonomy here. And if you break it down, I see 6 different kinds of partners: integration partners, management consultant partners, managed services partners, advisory service partners, software development partners, and tools and apps partners. And within those, there are separate categories as well. So I think absolutely, Jon, your comment is spot on. But to the large degree, everything has changed about everything that all these different partner types are doing. But it is important to sort of look at the different kinds of partners that there are in the ecosystem. Also from the customer standpoint, I think customers can sort of really need to think about what are the kinds of partners I need in order to be successful. And I always like to say, and it sounds a little harsh, but the onus is on the partner because at the end of the day, they are, for better or worse, the adult supervision in the project. They're the ones who really have to bring the wisdom and experience into the project and help the customers navigate this. So I think that it got hard for all 6 types of partners and the subcategories underneath. Just staying abreast of what SAP is doing is complicated. Staying abreast, as what Jon said, the legal and regulatory environment around this is hard. And for customers, you're going to have to step up your game to really do a better job engaging with partners because you can't do this alone anymore. I'm sorry. It's
and if I can just jump in, Josh isn't wrong about the taxonomy, but I also don't want people to feel too bewildered about having to map all of this on a map, because I think in the end it's about two key things. One is you need some trusted advisors that understand your industry and situation. And two is you need some folks that can help you on the forward path to quote unquote innovation, however you define that, competing effectively in the current volatile circumstances we find ourselves in a way that allows you to be aggressive / agile, whatever the hell you want to call it, while mitigating your risk, which is the other really important consideration here that a lot of vendors that come in to you selling shiny new toys won't talk about or don't know how to talk about. And so, how do you do that? And then how do you gauge Sapphire with that in mind? Because and this is well known because of our watch party and our replay, was very disheartened by seeing KPMG on the stage, just because I feel like the answers to these questions may include some of the usual suspects, but they're going to include a lot of different kinds of vendors and trusted advisors as well. And I think another big missed opportunity on SAP's part to show the diversity of their partner ecosystem, and also to amplify and give some much needed visibility to partners that are doing, frankly, kick-ass shit across all of the spectrum that Josh just described.
I fully agree on that, because when doing the keynote, the person sitting right behind me was stating exactly at that moment, now we're going for the big four, the traditional big four on the stage segment. And it's exactly what you say. Yeah, it's of course the partnership that SAP probably wants to promote in that way. But like one day before, when there was a partner summit, you also, of course, had the statement, yeah, the partners implementations now with all the help and all the tools that you get now like 50% shorter and 50% cheaper. So there was this kind of vibe then that, okay, adoption is now not the problem of SAP anymore, but now it's more or less part or problem of the partners to actually bring the horsepower to the street, which in my opinion is a framing, of course, I do not really agree with. But on the other hand, when you, of course, talk with actual customers, those who are on this kind of movement, they also argue that, hey, fine, great to have you, because I met so many partners here who just want to have this kind of green, brown, selective conversation with me, instead of really looking forward what are the capabilities that my business needs. And I think this is something where we, from the partners business, definitely have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, like, look, where do we have to move our butts?
Absolutely. And I think, and let's also split, if you will, the taxonomy, the customer base, into two important categories. Because if you look at, one of the big announcements, or one of the continuing announcements, was the evolution of Grow. And, and absolutely, I talked to Christian Klein about this. Absolutely, the moving forward, the opportunity for growth from SAP side is to be the growth engine for volume and revenue. That the stated strategy is that can only happen through the partner channel. And that's, again, a complicated set of partners necessarily that you might want to have. And I think, John and I have said this in various forms, various times, and I know, Alexander, you agree with this. This is a active ecosystem, but not necessarily the healthiest ecosystem in terms of how their interactions with SAP are evolving. And so I think it puts a certain tension into the market and into the relationships to say, yeah, SAP is really dependent more and more, particularly in Grow. Absolutely not not to discount the Rise problem as well, but it's this ecosystem needs a little bit of a reimagining, if you will, and an evolution itself.
And I want to get back, hopefully, Alexander, to the customer part of this, but I would say in Josh's taxonomy that there's an even more important distinction, which is on the Rise side, between the customers that are on some kind of a modernization journey with SAP, ideally to the public cloud ERP, but some kind of modernization, versus those that are not. And what does that mean for everything they're trying to do with AI and otherwise? And that, I think, is a critical issue. But as far as the partners are concerned, like, just to crystallize this, I think the problem here is that, and I tell this to every single vendor that I meet with, but I say, do you want to be disrupted right now by your partners or by hostile third parties that don't have your community's best interests at heart and may not even understand the issues they're facing? What do you want? Because right now, you have some of the most deep-pocketed competitors you could ever imagine showing up on knocking on your doors, right? We're not talking about other legacy ERP vendors that are trying to reinvent. We're talking about the Anthropics. In North America, we're talking about Palantir. These are sophisticated organizations, and
they're a lot of money.
And yep, and Google as well, and add to the list, right? And And so do you want your partners building this important breakthrough stuff, or do you want other vendors trying to lift that out of your community? And I just don't think that we had good answers for that at Sapphire in terms of the partner temperature in the room that I was taking. Now, having said that, I like to be careful about not throwing vendors under the bus for a 2 or 3 day show. I think, SAP, if SAP wants a result here, there's a lot of cool partners out there doing amazing stuff. But instead of kind of surging forward, I got the sense that most partners were kind of reevaluating their playbook in the light of the new API and golden path strategies and documents and all of that, and trying to make sure they're guideline compliant and all of this. And let's take an optimistic view and say that they are mostly compliant in their approach, which is probably optimistic for some, but they still have to do that homework. So instead of kind of surging ahead, now you're in homework mode. And I really think by tech ed season, SAP really is going to need to have a whole different atmosphere around innovation in the partner community.
But let me
shots fired.
let me put a word on that, because when there's tech ed season, we will talk again about solutions and so on, which is the typical tech ed focus. Sapphire should be, of course, the big picture, the customer situation, and so on. While SAP undoubtedly was able, and Christian Klein was able to present a strategy and an imagery that we definitely, I think that's where we agree, can be considered sound and congruent and something we can work on. What I missed there, and this is, I think, something which was a little bit a red line throughout the keynotes, the actual customer problems that the autonomous enterprise will solve in that way. Yeah, because it's great as a vision, it's great as a strategy, but it was again quite SAP-ish in its focus. Do you agree with that evaluation?
Well, John and I have talked about this in other venues, but yeah, the absolute, I have to say bluntly, lack of empathy towards the complexity of the global economy and the chaos and the mommy crisis we live in was omitted, and at an unfortunate level. That being said, when you sort of peel back the layers of a lot of what SB was saying about autonomous industry functionality, and particularly the assistants, the collections of assistants for any of these individual large categories, they address specific problems that are that are front and center in the customer's in the customer's life. It's just I mean, that was more I would say more in the sessions than on the keynote stage. Keynote stage was very much a sort of an agentic AI party.
Well, I want to push back on that a little bit, because this is like a hard conversation to capture in its totality, because I do agree, and we've already mentioned in other podcasts, that SAP really could have done a better job of naming the problem statement of the overall economic volatility and global turmoil and challenges that customers are facing. Like, the problem statement could have been laid out in a much more sort of, Josh used the word empathy, but in a much clearer, kind of visible way. So we missed the problem statement. We jumped kind of directly to solutions. But I thought the customer interviews, particularly in the day one keynote, were quite strong. And what they did get across in both and also the JP Morgan Chase interviews is that, and this is sort of the hard, cruel news about agentic AI that I think a lot of market observers and those that are punishing SAP stock on Wall Street don't understand, which is, without the proper sort of foundation of a kind of a modern infrastructure, if you don't get those foundations right, whatever AI you try to layer on top of that is just not going to get the job done. And, for example, with H&M, they talked about how this foundation that they're building is helping them to get more precision in supply chain, to get more real-time access across financial processes, and how to do that now. They're starting to build things like their store intelligence solution and stuff like that. Both the customers did name some of the modern problems they're facing and how they're dealing with that. And so I think we have to kind of try to be fair here to SAP in that regard, because if you look at it, I thought it was quite strong. Now, I didn't think in the second day's keynote the customer interviews captured that quite as well, but in the first day, I thought they did.
Right. What was it like in Madrid? I'm curious how it's ended. Can you sort of reflect back to us on that?
Quite similar. I think the focus definitely was on the idea, on the strategy, on the concept itself. It was interesting to hear the things that they talked about and the things they deliberately left out, like the analogies, like the flywheel that
was gone,
was put out of
what
service.
Happened to my flywheel T-shirt, man? I can't wear it anymore. It's so disappointing.
It will come back, I'm sure, like in 2 or 3 years, and in a different setting. But what I was getting the vibes based on the customer stories was, of course, the ROI attribution problem. Yeah, when SAP shows a customer saying like, I'm saving money with AI, of course, there's this question and the doubts like, was it the AI, or was it the system consolidation, or the cleaning of the data? Which, to be honest, in my opinion, at first I do not really care, because even if AI is not 100% responsible for the benefits, but just like 70%, I'm so happy that AI makes a lot of our customers who were reluctant and hesitant about approaching topics like getting their data clean, getting their household clean. If it motivates them to do that, I'm full on that. I'm absolutely happy. And then already the AI strategy definitely has its merits.
Right. So just real quick on that, and we can get into it further as you see fit. But as a big time AI geek in my research, like SAP's overall AI strategy in terms of how it's trying to build context and what you might call agentic harnesses around its solution to essentially put guardrails and governance and some level of deterministic aspects, not full determinism, mind you, but some around its agents is actually, I think, pretty cutting edge, and some of the forward thinking stuff around organizational memory and improved tabular prediction models as well is really strong. Where SAP is going to face more challenges is around things like pricing, around adoption, around user experience. It's not clear yet how great the user experience is going to be inside of Joule, and that does matter greatly. And then, of course, all the messaging around it, right? So, we could kind of poke holes at the autonomous word, for example. So I think the underlying strategy and architecture looks increasingly strong, so much so that in my podcast with Josh, he actually changed a little bit some of his positions on some of this stuff. So it kind of shows you the progress that SAP is making, because Josh would not tweak his positions lightly. But still, like the overall thing, you have to hit on all the check boxes. But I do think the underlying architecture is one of the best parts of SAP's story.
And fundamentally, to clarify my
change, not a change of mind, not a change.
It wasn't really a change.
No, it was a slight tweak though in his position.
But it's a point tweak, because actually, what SAP did is they redefined cutting edge to a more rational level of functionality, and again to this concept of governance, this concept of security and safety, if you will, that underlies a lot of this strategy. It's not just crazy. Let's let AI, the autonomous empire just run, and it will run and run and run, and everything will be perfect. There's a real sort of pragmatism to it that I really appreciated, and quite frankly, I think the customers do too. And we've talked about this. I think several conversations, both in front of our fellow analysts as well as privately, the customers recognize the value of the semi-autonomy that SAP is giving them. They're not going to. They're smart enough, and I think that's important to say. We can't just throw a switch and let this thing run like a black box, and they're not going to. SAP is going to make it very, frankly, easy for them to do that and still gain a lot of value.
I want to take it a little bit further though, Josh, because when you, if people go back some time on Alexander's podcast series, they can listen to you hammer away at 50 Cent problems. And we discussed this again on the podcast I did with you at Sapphire. And my interpretation is that part of what you've been criticizing there is a more kind of generic approach to productivity in the enterprise using whatever you call it, email generation or whatever, like these more generic approaches. Whereas what SAP is doing that you described around all the governance and the constraints also allows them to go deeper and embed AI into industry. So, for example, during the keynote, they talked about a typical pharma process from planning to production. So they really went into this industry AI about how every material must be traced, documented, ordered in life sciences. And so how is SAP going to play into that? Through these multi-agent, they call them audit-ready processes, detecting disruptions early, keeping operations within regulatory limits, simulating compliant recovery options in real time, specific batch releases as a business outcome. Josh, I think you would agree. Those aren't the 50-cent problems you were referring to before. This is an entirely different set of problems. And so the point is, by making agentic AI more manageable and better governed, you can now go into these industry settings and start solving much not solving maybe, but improving the ability to solve tougher problems and automating some of them and being more strategic about how your humans operate in that context.
Right. Well. And I think, what I liked about the framing around assistance as these collections of agents is that the framing was very specific to core, highly important and valuable business processes that mattered to customers and would sort of discuss in the language of the stakeholder, of the customer. So, I went to the CX presentation, and there are these really important, fundamental processes: market to lead to cash, discover to fulfill, issue to resolution. That were sort of, these are the framing for what we're doing in this domain, this troubled and very important domain that John and I keep saying, come on, let's keep pushing the CX thing. And then underneath it are sets of assistants: a content assistant, a campaign assistant, sales assistant, deal closing assistant, planning and order management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's on SAP to make those experiences within those assistants beautiful and fulfilling and complete and get it done right. But I like the framing a lot. I think the framing spoke to the business problem of the stakeholder in these domains, and that was across the whole sort of the five major categories.
And by the way, just for the listeners, sorry, Alexander, just for listeners, real quick, what we're talking about here is really diverting from the frontier AI model approach of bigger and bigger models trained on more and more stuff that are more general in pursuit of some grand AGI prize. This is more about a kind of neurosymbolic AI, if you will, that is tying these capabilities into problems where you can verify the output and actually use smaller and more affordable models with better context and move away from some of the science lab stuff and into stuff that is more relevant to customers. And so I think that's what I really like. Not SAP is not the only vendor doing this, obviously, but this is what I like about what SAP was able to get across there. Sorry, Alexander. I interrupted the host. I want to stop.
No, but
no
relevant
problem.
to business stakeholders, and this is something that's really sacred to us, is how are we going to take this conversation out of the office of the CIO into the office of the line of business and make it relevant to them? Because that's certainly what these big time competitors are doing, that you mentioned earlier, John. They're trying to do that. A lot of them come from more of a line of business focus, or frankly, or promise anything focus. I think either one. And I think pulling together the strategy around assistance and making these assistants identified with core business processes in each of those domains is a pretty smart strategy.
Yeah, but I think from my conversation with customers, many already have understood that just adding more AI onto legacy stuff is just resulting in all trust but no vector. But I think basically every technology has at this early point the problem that you are putting like pilots and use cases and so on, and cannot really move further, because they just lead to these kind of 50 cents problems that Josh was referring to half a year ago, which probably is always the first step into a new technological level. But when you understand, it's all about the architecture, it's all about, let's say, the environment where this kinds of new technology is working, then understanding actually happens that integration is all about the value that we receive in that.
Absolutely.
So based on what you heard in the last 2 weeks and your conversations with partners and other analysts, do you think that the ecosystem based on these kinds of new technology is now moving back in again becoming the major problem solver of its customers, or are we still too much circling around ourselves?
I think it's an unfolding.
Go ahead, John.
Sorry, go ahead. You first. Take it.
No, the opportunities here, I'll say very quickly, because one of the things we heard, and I sort of wish I had kind of a bingo card during the keynotes, we heard a lot about heterogeneity, about support for heterogeneity, and the underlying story about supporting the non-SAP data and process set that lives within these customer spaces. That's a partner opportunity, full stop. That cannot be done by SAP. They can enable it through the infrastructure. They've done that in, in Business Data Cloud in particular, in the integration hub in particular. But that's a partner opportunity, and it's a very rich partner opportunity. Are the partners, do they understand it? Is SAP making partnership, shall we say, building the partnership model to make that easy and to make that successful? I don't think so, not yet. This is just one of the many big partner opportunities for driving enormous value into the customer base.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would go with Josh that I think the opportunities are opening up, but I would say that, like I said earlier, that now there's some new check boxes that need to be checked around you compliant with the architectural guidelines. But if you can do that, the opportunities are there too. And I think so much of this, in my opinion, is about knowing your industry and having intimate knowledge of your customers better than anyone else, and then being able to build solutions, some of which may be agentic, some of which maybe not, but a lot of them are going to be data informed in some way, and be able to build those solutions for customers that really solve problems. And I think it's encouraging to think about a lot of micro vertical solutions that eventually fill up a store and an environment. And there's no reason that SAP can't kind of support the building of that and enable that for partners. I think there are, it's not like immediately partners can transform their business models and seize that. But I do think from a long-term perspective, what Josh is alluding to, I think creates a fairly hopeful picture to partners. I do want to call out one of the strongest blog posts that came out since Sapphire was by Upper Edge, and Upper Edge is an advisory that focuses on contract negotiations. So they have an angle, a dog in this fight around contracts, but they also take no money from customers, and so they're pretty. I mean, no money from vendors, excuse me. So they're pretty free to do the customer what's in it for you thing. And I think they made a very valid point that there are some potential gaps between the open heterogeneous message from the keynote stage and some of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes around enforcement of policies and stuff like that. And what Upper Edge concludes is that if you want to guarantee yourself the options to use your data in the ways you want to use them and to lock in the kinds of pricing that SAP is currently offering and all of that, then you better get that in your contracts. And I would tend to agree with them that you cannot at this point accept platitudes from SAP or any other vendor. And when you notice those kinds of discrepancies, you do need to bear down a little bit and make sure not only that you're validating your path forward, but that it is in writing. And I'm sorry, SAP probably hates that I'm talking that way, but the point is that is the price of this, of starting to bear down on it. And look, some of why SAP is bearing down is really important because these new agentic tools can be very, very disruptive from a security perspective, and are often, in the case of MCP, for example, a lot of security holes that are introduced by that too. So SAP is, I understand why they want to audit a lot of those environments to monitor them, but at the same time, you have to be careful not to have a chilling effect on customers and partners. And so that's where we're at now, is that, SAP wants to encourage all this innovation, but I believe that they've also put everyone in a position where they need to also validate what they're doing, and that's just the nature of the beast right now.
And I think there's an absolute imperative for SP to do something they're not great at, which is both have a tremendous amount of transparency about this across the board, and to do it in a thoughtful and mindful way. In other words, don't just throw something up against the wall and see if it sticks, but really engage with the community, both the partner and the user community. That we have, in Europe, DSAG is very powerful. The UK IG is also, I think, obviously ASUG here in North America. That needs to happen at a much more fundamental level. I've said elsewhere, and I'll say it again here because I think it's worth saying. More and more, I think SAP needs an office of the partner advocate, an office of the partner ombudsman, who really, that office literally sits there as a check and a balance against crazy stuff that frankly just sort of emerges without thought. And I think John and I both had conversations with SAP execs where at a senior level where we say, hey, there's this problem down in the partner community with this particular term and condition and this thing that seems to be crazy. Why is this? Is this really a problem? The answer is no, that shouldn't be a problem at all. Tell me how to fix it and I'll go fix it. That shouldn't happen just because Jon and I know somebody kind of thing. That should happen. That shouldn't happen at all. That should be anticipated and dealt with ahead of time.
But Josh, let me put a finger on that. I fully agree with you that we need someone like this, but couldn't it be that this could be an expectation into that this should be done or should be a task by chief partner manager, partner management of SAP itself, with being something like the one who should leverage these kinds of checks and balances instead of becoming, and this is something what the kind of feedback you get by more and more by more and more partners, with SAP moving towards the Microsoft-ish partner-driven sales model, almost like a new sales sector focusing on indirect sales by the partners.
Hi there. Quick break for a short message before we go right back to the episode. Enjoying the insights and stories on transformation every day? Want to make sure you never miss an episode packed with practical tips and best practices from the SAP world, featuring conversations with some of the most interesting people in the SAP universe? Then hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform, whether it is Apple, Spotify, or any other you use. And if our podcast brings you value, we would be incredibly grateful if you could leave us a 5-star review and share it with your friends and colleagues. Your support means the world to us. Thanks so much and happy listening.
As long as the partner organization essentially, it has to, this question this issue of partner advocacy has to be completely detached from sales goals and from quotas and from, and in fact, I would argue that part of the incentive process in the field with field sales has to be about partner success and partner enablement, just as much as it has to be about customer success and customer enablement. It's not right now. It's about SAP success, and that needs desperately to change. So structurally, I've always worried about how success is defined and on whose behalf the success is being enacted. So it needs to be independent, I think, because it has to be somebody who can stand up to a sales leader and say, "I'm sorry, this may look good in the quarter. When we talk to Wall Street, this is not going to look good 3 quarters down the road." And you got to do something.
But I think there, at least from my limited perspective, there's just one correct answer to that. What is success? Definitely not just sales. It's adoption. It's value generation. It's moving forward. But this is, of course, something which collides a little bit with the short-term goals in a stock-driven economic.
Well, it does, but I would make the argument that success should be a customer-defined KPI signed on by SAP and the partner that is tracked in as close to real time as is possible. And if it's not tracked in real time yet, why isn't it? Since we have so much of this technology supposedly to do that, and let's agree upon that and move. And as far as the markets are concerned, yes, the markets are a pain, but if SAP delivers on customer value, the market problem will lessen. It's all about that. And I would kind of point out that I think, and the host can take us wherever the host wants us to go with the remaining time. But I feel like we've missed a little bit on the customer side. And I think the partner discussion is really important. So I don't want to, cut that off too much. But I think the customer side of this is what we've kind of not fleshed out quite enough yet, in my opinion.
Right. Absolutely. That was exactly the next step. So concerning,
all right, here we go.
Concerning the customer situation, and I think that's the way we can quite comfortably segue from the partner situation to the customer situation. Like we said in the beginning, customers who have seen this kind of vision, who have seen things like the appless UI, which is probably for many actual users who have seen that, at first a quite frightening thought, because we still have so many discussions to get rid of SAP UI and move to Fiori. Now we are already into the new, in already one step further, why we still have not really clarified how customers who need the kind of close guardrails that SAP UI offers to them should be able to work in a completely free appless Joule-driven UI, which definitely favors the kind of highly intellectual user who knows everything about the processes, about the small and big things in this company. But Joe Average working with SAP UI, maybe of course a little bit hard stricken when he's thinking about these kinds of possibilities. What in your opinion, can we actually bother customers with at the moment? How much percentage of the autonomous AI is realistic within the next 12 months for customers to achieve?
Well, I actually think we can get back to that question, but I think it's slightly not the question I would start with. As far as the UI is concerned, I would say there's a little less concern there in the sense that SAP has made it clear they're going to allow for multiple ways of interacting with the user experience. So, in other words, they're not going to do the deplorable thing that Google just announced and take away web-based search in favor of only an AI-based interface. So, I think customers are going to have time to adapt to some of the user experience changes by using Joule assistants, for example, or other forms of AI assistants in certain contexts without having to give up other forms of navigation. But I really want customers to kind of start with a much bigger picture conversation, which is, how are we going to compete in our industry going forward? Where do we excel? How do we mitigate risk? How do we become more responsive and adaptive across our processes? And then I want them to ask, how does SAP fit into that? And the same thing with their AI and data strategy. In that light, what is our AI and data strategy, and how does SAP fit into that? I think those become the most important questions. Now, the hard news for customers is that yes, your modern ERP infrastructure is part of that ultimately. Like, you can put it off, you can ring fence it if you want, you can claim that ECC is working just fine for you and all of that. But I'm here to tell you that, and I sound like Jeff Scott maybe now,
Yeah.
I'm here to tell you that at some point in time, you must confront the fact that it's just not good enough for how you need to compete now. And whether that means going on an SAP modernization journey or with someone else, you simply can't tolerate silos inside your organization anymore. Josh is applauding. I know he is.
That's the word. That's the
That
word. Yeah.
is technical, people, process, culture, all of it. But the best thing that AI is doing for all of its flaws is just forcing that conversation upon us in a way we've never had to truly have before. And in my opinion, that's where you have to start. And then figuring out how SAP plays into that, is a very customer, specific conversation. Now, what I think customers will find is that the more you get on board with SAP's plan and SAP's preferred golden path, so to speak, the better your SAP experience is going to get. But at some point, you may have to push back on some aspects of what SAP wants you to do and navigate that relationship. And by the way, that's what the user groups are also for. And you're going to need them, I think, and they're going to need you. So keep that going. But anyway, that's where I would want to really start, Alexander, is there and not in a SAP centric way of looking at the world. I think you have to feed it all into where you're ultimately headed. Now, am I being idealistic on some level? Do most organizations talk this way? No, of course not. Most of them don't. But this is part of the problem. And if you don't talk that way, I just don't see how you can succeed going forward, because you're going to end up doing a lift and shift to beat a deadline. You're going to end up with a messy environment in the cloud, and you're going to throw some AI on that, and it's not going to work very well, and you're going to blame everybody. I don't see how that works.
And you're going to miss an opportunity that is fundamental to this AI era, is to really revisit what it is, what are these core processes and how they look and how they should be operating. And that is, so John and I have been running these business case workshops. We did, we cracked the code in terms of how to do it at this last Sapphire. And and one of the idea is, how do you teach architects and particularly tech savvy people on the SAP side to think bigger, to think across silos, to think about how do I engage stakeholders in a business problem that may only look like it's a single domain like supply chain, but actually has this relevance across the board. And what's brilliant about doing these workshops and brilliant about attacking the problem this way is that in every single time we do this, there's this aha moment where it's like, this is a supply chain business problem that generates a ripple effect over over at the office of the CFO and the office of HR and the CHRO and down down in the weeds in operations as well. This effect across the enterprise, when it's understood and when it's visualized and seen, can have this provide this platform for looking at how do we, to hell with AI, how do we become more productive? How do we become more efficient? How do we tackle business problems in a more effective way? Because we as businesses are so up against the wall with the omni crisis world we live in. And I think that customers have this huge opportunity now to rethink this and maybe you'll end up going with a Palantir to solve this problem. Maybe you'll end up going with someone other than SAP, even though SAP is a huge part of your native environment. But at least you need to be having these discussions in your company, because without them you are just going to be left behind, quite frankly, on so many levels.
So it's target operating model first, definitely.
Yeah, and then I think there's some AI specific things that if you don't really nail them down, you're going to have problems. Like one of them is AI projects and data projects, even without AI, to make Josh happy that we don't have to always mention AI, are much more iterative than classic ERP. You do end up having to test it on real data. Now you can start with data that's less impactful in your organization. You can start by avoiding autonomous processes, for example, and keep humans, supervising everything. But you have to start somewhere and build on it. And that's totally different than how we used to think about ERP. And so it's a different kind of mentality inside of an organization. It's much more of kind of a continuous delivery, continuous observability model. And I think it has enormous implications for talent and skills. And then I think you have to make some decisions around what kind of AI strategy do you want to have, because you do have to have one because your executives are going to ask you about it. And look, are you going to use it as a way to kind of surveil your workers and put everyone in kind of a new kind of hamster wheel and measure their token output and all of that crap like some of the big tech companies are doing right now, which is really shocking to think that that's how people go through their work days? Or are you going to try to create more of a culture of experimentation around this technology and encourage people to sandbox new ideas and the light bulbs go off, which is what gets really exciting, by the way, when users start thinking about how they can rethink certain kinds of processes in ways they couldn't perhaps before. That's the exciting part. But if people are going to be feeling overly supervised and KPI'd to death with all of their keystrokes, I mean, at some point, like, how can we work when we're constantly being monitored all the time? And I think if you don't make those decisions and make people feel good about what they're being a part of, then I don't know, man. I mean, maybe some companies can get away with that, like the big tech companies that I just cited, but I don't see how a lot of companies can get away with that and succeed in harvesting the right kind of talent inside their organizations. And so these meta conversations are actually, in the lowercase way,
Meta.
are really, really important, because until then, how you use SAP will be really impacted by all of that. And then within the SAP context, obviously, so much is changing right now. And, evidently we need a lot more SAP events than we used to get a handle on this, because we're going to need SAP Connect in the fall more than ever. I know we were going to talk about that because you need that end-to-end view. You need the CX view. You need the HR view. As Josh alluded to, all the stakeholders that you need involved in this decision extend beyond your SAP footprint and include parts of your SAP footprint that are not part of your, core, ERP. And so I don't know. I think it's a lot of change for organizations, and I hope people see the positives in that. But I acknowledge that this is not something that is easy to do. Like, it kind of feels like, how do we go forward, and are our vendors providing us with enough understanding of how to do that?
I think, and there's a just jump in and I'll let you go. But this opportunity sits in front of us today to use this AI moment to try to define a more collaborative and cooperative enterprise, and that because and this is SAP has been smart about again, this heterogeneity support. These assistants do function in a world in which the underlying process does not have to be an end-to-end SAP process. They are meant to be supporting heterogeneity. This concept of let's reinvent ourselves as a collaborative enterprise by reinventing how we think about end-to-end processes. That to me is a potential social cultural revolution that could really make a difference in this constant problem of the productivity gap we have across the global economy. So, I mean, it's a very utopian sort of view. It's probably, I'm sitting out here on the left coast, probably having a little bit too much of a woo-woo kind of day. But I really think the collaborative enterprise is one in which we build this community of interest across what used to be silos that were, that were frankly created out of a necessity and that no longer is relevant.
And I would just urge customers to realize that we are at a fork in the road here that Josh, I think you just articulated. And I think there's a good fork and there's a fork that I think is going to lead to a very dehumanizing and mechanistic workplace. And I don't think that your software vendor selection solves that for you. I think you have to implement that software with your end state in mind and head towards that. In smaller enterprises, it can get really interesting because I just came back from a more of an SME cloud ERP show, and talking to customers there where they had really achieved a single source of truth, where they weren't arguing about data anymore, they were acting on it. That's a really big deal for an organization. Now, in a large enterprise like most of SAP's customers, not all, that becomes much more complicated because of the heterogeneity that Josh described and the single source of truth. If you say that to a lot of large enterprise customers, they'll laugh in your face, obviously. But I do think customers are going to want to gravitate towards a handful of trusted data/applications platforms, and there'll probably be more than one. In some cases, maybe there will be one end-to-end in larger companies, but in general, I think there's gonna be maybe a few, and in some companies, maybe there'll be a customer one that's more CX focused and then a back-end operational one, and maybe there'll be more of an industry platform. But, there'll be less and less, I think, that they're gonna wanna consolidate on 1 or 2 or 3, and I think in my view is they're gonna consolidate on the ones that have the healthiest environment for them, the most choices, like Josh said, the most ability to plug and play where they need, the healthiest partner ecosystems and apps options. I think those are the ones that are going to win. And SAP Fairs in that will be a really fascinating unfolding story. And I know, Alexander, you're kind of pushing us for answers today on what that's going to look like, and I think that's a little hard to say. I mean, I think SAP has a chance to do that for its customers, and as someone who's been a part of this for a long time, I certainly hope to see that. But, there's formidable obstacles for everyone right now.
I think we can fully agree on that. SAP delivered now, maybe like after 3 years of a little bit of trying things out, it delivered definitely the first real comprehensive strategy on how to embed AI in all its colors and forms and so on into sustainable IT and company strategy. Still, of course, like we said, a little bit like still a little bit gray piece of puzzle is that gets color probably during SAP Connect with the customers really trying to translate that into an end-to-end process landscape and into actual architectures that they will use. What kind of topics from this year's Sapphire do you think will be probably the most prominent to be discussed? We have definitely something which are more ready to use than others with company knowledge, the knowledge graph, and so on, and the already mentioned appless UIs. Where do you think is the topics customers and visitors of SAP Connect probably should focus on?
Go ahead, John. That's a good. No, it's a very very good question, and I'm sort of to narrow it down. I'm going to pass it to my colleague John.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone is looking for more understanding of their specific industry and situation than they got at Sapphire. And so, in a way, AI interrupted the industry conversation because for a little while we had like SAP talking about industry CX, for example. And what I would say to SAP is like, let's keep that conversation going. Let's, because everyone's talking about AI for CX. Let's talk about what that looks like in different industry situations, right? Because a call center for airlines is totally different than a call center for, your financial and bank stuff. which is totally different than a call center for chemical supply issues, or petrochemical delays in transport. Like, let's realize that every industry has like real discrepancies here that need to kind of get played out. And, customers are on different levels of journey in terms of how, what quote unquote autonomous they want to be and all of that. And so I think the end-to-end frame is the right one, but I think it really needs some drill down into particular industry settings. And, SAP demonstrated at Sapphire that it has a lot of industry authority and knowledge in a lot of industries, but you don't get the deep dives yet. And, that's not what that show's about. So I think in the fall, you really need that. And if you can't get that from Connect, you got to get it from somewhere else. So, hopefully SAP will embrace that. And I thought some of the industry AI stuff that they showed was some of the most compelling, which is mostly like co-innovation type projects at the moment. But I think that's where a lot of the big action is.
I think there's a caution that SAP has to sort of observe for Connect and for this end-to-end process story, which is ironic in the sense is, they've done a very good job, and we saw in the Analyst Day Zero some NDA stuff about how they sort of exploded out some of these process maps across autonomous finance, supply chain spend, HCM, and CX, and how they sort of turn into these very interesting sort of journey maps for customers to how to solve a particular problem. SAP sort of by design define finance, supply chain, spend, HCM, and CX as silos in an ironic way. As we're talking about breaking down silos, they're they did that, and this is a challenge that Spend Connect, and we saw this last time. Is how do you give a keynote for the supply chain people that makes it abundantly clear that the next the next session they have to go to is the CX one, and after that they've got to get over to HCM because they've got to have this connection in their mind that there's this bigger domain that they're part of instead of we're just trying to optimize within our silo. And I think that was a challenge at the first Connect, and I think it's going to be a challenge at the second Connect to really expand that mindset and get those supply chain people thinking, yeah, I got to go collaborate with my HCM people because I can't run a supply chain without people, for instance.
What I thought was really interesting was that the customers seemed primed for that. Like, I wasn't totally knowing what I would expect the first show, but Josh and I independently and together ran into a bunch of customers who were like a supply chain customer or a spend customer who said, I heard something from that CX keynote that was really interesting to me, or, they were seeing the sparks from that. And I thought that to me was really exciting because it's the sparks of interconnection around these various areas that get me excited. And I think from a customer view, like it is the more and more you realize that the AI stuff, especially the agentic stuff, really thrives on an end-to-end view. And the more you have to go around to different places, it's basically known as the context, right? But when the context that makes agents seem intelligent is rather fragile. And so the more you can have an end-to-end layer that shares the same context, the more you can do without having to wait for magical frontier model industry standards to like solve your problems someday, hypothetically, asterisks. So like, let's do it now, and let's do this hard work and connect all of this stuff, and now we can really play ball. And I think, the thing that I would just say also though is we're not off the hook on this public cloud ERP discussion, and I hope SAP realizes too, because you can't just build agents to fill the industry gaps. You have to build it into the software. And we had a really interesting meeting with the public cloud ERP team at Sapphire. And it turns out they've really expanded out of professional services. Their second largest industry is consumer products. They got mills and mining and industrial manufacturing as some of their top industries now for the public cloud. So customers listen to this. The excuses to not looking hard at the public cloud are starting to get smaller. Now, there are still some things that are missing for sure, but I would advise you, instead of giving up, to press SAP on those and figure out how that can be solved either by SAP or a partner. And if you must do the private cloud for whatever reason, you're still not off the hook, because you still need to mimic to the best possible extent the sort of public cloud data standard kind of concept so that you can absorb new functionality, including AI, but not just AI, to satisfy Josh again, more effectively and better. And so you're not off the hook on that because of AI. And I know that people want to think they're off the hook now because they can now consume all this AI and it compensates for all their bad internal decisions or even just ones that seem good at the time but don't feel good anymore. Like you can't live like that, but you have to fix all this stuff. And
you can't thrive on that for sure.
Yeah, you can't. You certainly you can live
right
somewhere. Yeah, I would argue you might be in hospice care pretty soon, but you can live.
Yeah. Well, thriving,
but you're not thriving, right? You're not gonna have one of those really compelling stories that gets energizes.
And Jon, I definitely have to give you a hug about this take, because this is something which is at the absolutely bottom of my heart, that in the last years we still far too, in our promotions, in our marketing stuff, focused on the professional services spin concerning the public cloud, framing it in a way that I think is especially now absolutely not giving justice to what public cloud actually can do. Public cloud is now absolutely at home also in product-centric industries, full stop. I have at the moment 2 customers. One is one of the biggest Austrian automotive companies who is going full on into the public cloud with everything that he has. No discussion about anymore about, don't we really need the extensibility and the kind of, let's say, possibilities that we have in the private part? They are fully convinced, and so much more are now fully convinced. The one thing that may be lacking, like you said, some localizations here, maybe some planning functionalities like cross planning there. But I think this is something that definitely can be solved from a development standpoint. We as a partner are in constant communications and interactions with the development, with the product management. So it does not really make sense not to start the discussion with public cloud. Definitely.
It kind of reminds me of the vehicle thing, because I think you could, 4 years ago or so, you could have equated SAP Public Cloud ERP with maybe an electric vehicle with those pros and cons. Now I think we're kind of in the hybrid vehicle land where the pros and cons have been significantly diminished. And now it's a little more like, this could really be viable for a whole lot of different workloads. And, I'll bet your Austrian customer is really happy about their ability to consume forward innovation from SAP based on that model.
Exactly.
In that industry,
The especially the automotive industry is now under heavy pressure not to fall behind. Never again. They just not have time and any capacity anymore to concentrate on IT hustles. They really have to fully concentrate on their business, on their maybe segue into new revenue possibilities and so on. And this is something where public cloud traditionally shines. So definitely, from my position, there's no reason, if there are not the 1 or 2 knockout criteria met, that public cloud may still have in certain corner areas. There is definitely not any reason anymore not to start the discussion with the public cloud. Absolutely.
One of the nice things about the continuous evolution of RISE, to bring that topic into the
here we go. Let's bring out the tool chain. Let me guess.
No, I wasn't going there.
We're not going tool chain. Oh, okay.
No. It's just that, one of the nice things about RISE is that it really has evolved to be supportive of a hybrid models of deployment. Yeah. And one of those aspects of hybridization is the public-private cloud hybrid. And what we're seeing, and we saw this, talk to customers about this at Sapphire. I've talked to customers before Sapphire as well. That there's a lot of companies that are definitely looking at public cloud as a smaller, local, more nimble component of a larger hybrid environment that still includes some ECC, because that's how big they are. But I think this is on the thin edge of the wedge, that getting these public cloud instances running in these satellite offices or in these individual areas is also planting seeds for the eventual widespread adoption inside these customers of public as they move through their hybrid journey and particularly start sunsetting some of those old ECC systems.
And when you use it, it opens your eyes, right?
And luckily, SAP is doing a good job of making it worthwhile to keep your eyes open.
One thing that I may add to that is what we definitely should take these kinds of, especially in hybrid discussions, two-tier, whatever you may call it. We really should, and this is something from my experience, which works out pretty well. We really should keep that discussion on the technical level with the technical people, because for the business people, either if you're on the private cloud of that hybrid model or if you're in the public cloud, the best practices should be absolutely the same. Stick to the standard, try to always be on the latest release, try to be always get the most modern and actual capabilities and functionalities into your end-to-end process. And with that, you will be sound. You will have your environment clean, and you will be able to concentrate on other things than keeping the lights on. Yeah. Right. In my customers, I always try to keep the discussion. We are doing cloud. That's it. If it's private, if it's public, in the end, it's just a technical question.
Right. Excellent. Yeah, I didn't even say tool chain, John. But
yeah.
Do you want to say tool chain?
Well, I'll say it. I think it's an example of why I think when I said earlier about staying on your toes, that includes with SAP's own offerings, because I think, if you weren't at the show and you were kind of heads down, I think SAP is making some progress on a lot of different aspects of this. Josh and I got into it in detail on our on-site podcast. We don't need to do that here, but it does invite a more thorough review of what Rise has to offer now, and I think that's healthy for customers, because ultimately Rise was sort of billed as transformation as a service, but in reality, I'm not so sure it felt that way. And now I think you're inching towards that a bit with things like the cloud ALM kind of continuous monitoring stuff, and all of the things that Lean IX can do to help you with manage your landscapes, and something I affectionately refer to as the demonetization of Signavio, which SAP probably doesn't like to hear, but more like making those tools a little more baked into everything that SAP has to offer customers and prospects, and a little bit less emphasis on sell that. And so I'm seeing progress there, and I think it would invite a fresh look at some of these solutions, and not just falling back on what you thought SAP was doing 2 or 3 years ago, because whether or not you're going to commit extensively to SAP going forward and in what capacity, you do need to probably reevaluate based on the progress that's been made. And that, of course, includes a very complicated data picture with a bunch of acquisitions we haven't even talked about that look promising, but also create complications in terms of evaluating what SAP has to offer.
And here's a challenge to customers I'm going to place on the table here. It's up to you to lead the discussion with your account executive, not the other way around, about innovation in your company. And this is super important. This is, the pushback we've gotten, all of us, I think, from customers at different stages who are in different stages in their transformations, is that I'm not being told the right information. I didn't know that I could do this. This wasn't available to me. I was told the only way to go this way was with a Rise contract, and Rise or nothing, et cetera, et cetera. And at every single juncture, we've found that there's frankly not enough information from the account exec to the customer for the customer to make the decision. The customer's going to have to own the information themselves. So whether that, and that is never been more important now, because there's so much going on. Quite frankly, these account execs are struggling to absorb it as well. So,
sure.
The most important thing, if you will, I would say, as a customer, to step back and say, what does this whole experience of 2 weeks of Sapphires mean, is that there's a lot that you need to take on yourself in terms of at least being the master of your fate, the master of your path forward in transformation, and know what questions to ask. And that may involve engaging with some advisory services to help you make those intelligent choices. Because if it's done right, I mean, just a quick example, going to the Cloud ALM Summit a few weeks ago, and there's customers saying, God, this tool chain stuff is really great. When I get to the deploy and run phase, no one told me it also works in discover, prepare, and explore. Why didn't they tell me that? Well, just AE back to Jon's monetization of Signomia, the AE had no, at that point, incentive to sell it to you because there was no monetization for Cloud ALM in particular, so they just didn't bother. That's shame on them, but that's also shame on you if you don't look at that and go, well, I need to be the master of my fate, not depend on my vendor to just lead me there.
I was back at my time at SAP. I was part of that committee and this discussion, really positioning the demand for that. Hey, guys, girls, the BOM discussion with customers has become so absurdly complicated, which nobody really understands anymore, that we really should talk about having something like a one price, one things model and so on, comparing it back then to, let's say, these kinds of retail bundles where you get, let's say, a viewing experience from a home cinema. We did an internal workshop back then where you say, listen, if you want to have like a home cinema experience, you rely on others putting things together. In the end, it's something that we should offer to our customers, a certain experience with the solutions that we would like to sell. Unfortunately, to be honest, and this is something that I definitely criticize at the moment in RISE, the BOM discussion within RISE has become at least as complicated as it was 6 years ago without RISE, if not even more. This is something definitely where we all have to work on. And I see this with my customers who engage with me. I take with them the bombs that they are presented apart, pull them back together again. This is something where the help of consultants is definitely needed, because the danger now with the credits, with the consumption and so on, to be maybe not on the right path is incredibly high. And especially when you look then on whatever this kind of bomb is based. Is it an old DDA and so on? There are so many holes you can stumble in, that this is definitely something you should take your time with, and you should take considerable care that you are not, let's say, 1 year later already in a situation where you have to turn some screws within your contract again.
Well, and unfortunately, Alexander, we have to add AI pricing to that mix now, and the difficulties that all vendors are having with AI pricing right now. And SAP, I think, is working to try to create pricing that makes sense, but it's difficult, and I don't think you can do without an expert advisor on this stuff, as I said, around the contracts around this, and someone who knows not just how SAP is pricing AI, but how a lot of vendors are, so that so that if you do sign into long-term things, that you know what you're signing into, and that part doesn't get easier. I do want to point out that Josh and I ducked your jugular question on that I think we shouldn't be allowed to duck, which is what percentage of the autonomous enterprise is ready. So shall we take a crack at that? Because I think that's a really important question, and we can't duck that. We're in the hot seat, Josh. We got to do this.
Okay, Jon. Well, you get to go first.
I'm going to say 70%, and that might surprise you.
Wow.
But let me explain why. Because I'm a firm believer that the foundation has to be built, which includes the modern ERP backbone, before you can even start thinking about autonomy. And I think a lot of the tools to build that foundation are there already. But the problem is that the new stuff is rolling out slowly. And even if it were rolling out faster, customers might not be ready. We don't have time to do this on this podcast, but all the different announcements SAP made at Sapphire, including things like Joule Work and various Joule Studio components, whatever, like they're on different release timelines, and not everything that you saw at Sapphire is ready for you to consume if you want it. And even if you did, you wouldn't want autonomy necessarily anyway, and that's a whole different conversation, right? And SAP, actually has a lot more ability to create nuanced approaches to human supervision in these processes than you might think based on the autonomous enterprise headline. But the thing I would say about the 70% is, I think if that math is correct on my part, it's going to move slow to 75 and 80, because the next steps are going to be really hard. And so I think the foundations to take it a long way towards where you want to go and get that real data platform in place, a lot of that is there, but the next steps are going to be hard. And getting your data to the point that AI agents can use it and effectively, and all of that, it's going to be really heavy lifting. And I'm a big believer that the last mile is where the action is, but also where it's harder. And so that's why I took such a high percentage. But I will say that getting to 80 is going to be hard. it's going to be really hard. Like, I think it's going to be, anyway, it's kind of admittedly, it's a weird scale I would use, but that's how I would look at it.
I'll take a slightly different tack on it, as you might have expected. I think that, first of all, I think there is no world in which there will be 100% of autonomous enterprise, simply because for that to happen, the enterprise would have to stand still and let the technology catch up. It doesn't. For the same reason we'll never have AGI, because we as humans will never stop evolving our own intelligence, and therefore our own complexities in our lives and in our cultures and economies. So I think if I were to take that 70% number and just sort of dissect it a little bit, I think that 70% autonomy would be a goal. And if we are at 70% of 70%, I think that's probably pretty legitimate right now. Partly because what a lot of SAP's done in building out these assistants is simply set them on top of a set of agents that are themselves on top of existing functionality, the functionality that they are drawing on from inside the apps, if you will, of S/4HANA and the associated cloud applications are not necessarily net new. That's stuff that's already worked together. I'm going to talk about the tool chain because that's the one I've really dug into a lot. The assistants there, the systems analysis assistant, data management assistant, custom code assistant, all that stuff is sitting on top of a lot of stuff that A, already exists, and B, was not particularly well integrated at one point because most of them were brought in through acquisition. So you're going to get, by pulling together an agentic framework, an assistant framework on top of that, you're going to get a tremendous amount of automation of those processes. You cannot do a fit to standard workshop in a fully automated world under any circumstance. That's not how that works. You're not going to be able to do change management in a fully automated way. That's not how that works. But to get to that 70 or maybe even that 80% level, I think we're getting close. And I'm thankful for the fact that if you really, in my analysis, if you really delve into the opportunity, you don't need to get to 100%, which you will never get to anyway, in order to have huge value. John, go
totally.
ahead.
And I just want to say that I played along with Alexander, so now let me bash autonomous for a sec. I don't even like the goal of the autonomous enterprise. I don't even like the frame. I don't like that as a way of thinking about the enterprise. I actually prefer buckle your seatbelts. I prefer the intelligent enterprise actually to the autonomous enterprise. Sorry, let's rehash an old branding. I'm sure SAP. I'm sure SAP wants to roll that out again. But I really like the human enabled enterprise. Like, and Josh has talked before, I think, really persuasively about taking the robot out of the human. Like, wouldn't it be wonderful if these technologies allowed us to do that and took away like the mundanity in our jobs, but gave us the opportunity. And some people have said, well, John, now that means that humans will just be stuck with the more complex riddles and problems, and what a drag that will be. And well, okay, so sometimes that will be a drag. But sometimes it's rewarding to actually challenge yourself intellectually as well. So that would be my rebuttal there. But also, it's not just about not having to do grunt work. It's also about all the human connections that you can make that are truly meaningful with your VIP customers, with key players in your supply chain, like maybe going to a few more events and getting out from behind your desk, like, and having that deeper emotional experience in community with the people that you're allegedly trying to help and work with. Yeah. And so to me, like, it doesn't matter what SAP calls it necessarily. If they're energized by it, fine, they clearly are. I'm just saying that for me, like, I think it really matters how you think about these technologies. And I just really insist on believing that we don't passively accept the terms that we get provided, but say, let's create the kind of life that we find affirming inside of our own lives and in our own communities and also in our organizations. And so whatever tagline you choose internally, I think is your business. And maybe you'll come up with your own tagline. I've run into a few companies that have done this. They created a tagline for their AI strategy, some of which, I'll be honest with you, I didn't like at all, but others that I did. So come up with your own that energizes you and your culture.
Absolutely. And that's, for example, we rolled out a few weeks before Sapphire, not really fully aware of what SAP would be presenting, a concept called the agentic enterprise, which is having a system of record, which is your business suite, underlying with all the data and all the stuff that you need, and a system of action on top of that, where actually the agents support you in running your business, which I think it's something which probably feels a lot of people more comfortable with. And I also would say instead of the beginning of better, the fitting tagline should have been the beginning of execution, because I think now we really should do exactly what you, Jon and Josh, are implying with our percentages. There is already so much there. We should not really, again, wait for 10 years and do our pilots and do our use cases, but really go into putting down the foundation that whatever you may call these kinds of concepts can actually start working.
Yeah, and I think that's why I gave out that high number of 70%, is because I want people to think there's so much you can do right now to move towards however you want to define that future for yourself. There's so much already available that you can move towards. And I take the unfashionable view that modern enterprise software is already pretty darn good. It's not perfect. There's a lot of problems, but I've been doing this since the 90s, and I think I'm in a position to say when software is better than it was. It is a whole lot better than it once was. And when we were trying to do business process reengineering, quote unquote, with this incredibly clunky client server system that had almost no integration points, except by hand, right? Like literally by hand, like in your mom's kitchen or whatever. We've come such a long way since then. So I just want to implore people to get started and not say, oh, well, this is so far beyond and this roadmap is so far. Who cares? Like start now, and see. And by the time you get there, some of the tools will be more robust and ready for you to consume also.
Let me bring this back full circle to where you started with this, Alexander, which is this notion that it's sometimes hard to look at a project and say, where was the ROI? Was it the AI? Was it the consolidation? Yeah. Was it both? I did that analysis on several things. And the answer is sort of, so what? Ultimately, and I think that underlies Jon's 70% number, is that we know that if you do these things, whether they end up being agent driven or just simple process driven, whether they are fully in the public cloud ideal version or some hybrid, if you're doing some of the basics, if you're to take this one example, if you're consolidating 11 individual instances into one, you're setting the stage already for a 70% lift. And then whether or not you add AI to that almost is irrelevant to the initial achievement of value. You're going to get more the more you run with it. And that to me should be the ultimate goal, is let's look at, I used to call business process reengineering, I called it bad practice repair, because so much of what was really being done was just cleaning up some messes. And frankly, that's where we are right now. In so many enterprises, we all sit down in the room and go, that's your process? That's how you do things? Wow, let's just do some basics here. And we're going to, let's get rid of swivel chair automation. That was one that came up the other day. Let's just do the fundamentals of getting technology to let's get rid of the spreadsheet. So I'm very hopeful that we are at this point where there's a goal out here. I'm pushing out in this far end of the continuum that says we're going to get this fully agentic 70% automation thing going on, but the path is now laid out much more neatly, all the different steps along the way. And if the first one is just get your data stuff together, second is get your stuff consolidated, third is let's break down some silos, and maybe down at the road you've got this fully agentic autonomous thing. Wow, you've got a path, and I think that path is better defined today than it ever has been.
I want to modify Josh's point just a little bit. What Josh is speaking of is, I think, what I call the power of compound architectures, where a lot of times the real ROI stories, when you peel them back, are a combination of a whole bunch of different things. And it might include everything from some good old-fashioned, what Josh calls predictive AI or machine learning. It might include some additional custom apps. It might include, some RPA, which is not irrelevant at all because it's very deterministic. It could be a whole bunch of different stuff, right? But the reason why it does matter to understand the agentic part is because, well, even with using smaller or open source models, it's a pretty expensive technology, and you shouldn't just layer it onto stuff unless you know why you're doing it. And also, it's got a very particular set of pros and cons, and the pros allow you to rethink things and do new stuff that you can't do before. But the cons also introduce new risks, and so. On one level, Josh is correct that it doesn't matter as long as you're getting an ROI. But on the other hand, I just want to put in a plug for literacy here. Like, we need to push for organizational literacy on these topics and not just accept that this technology does wonderful, magical things and really understand, oh, yeah, this is the kind of use case that agents are really perfect for, even though they are a little bit expensive and hard to control. And these are the things that are totally not good for us. And a lot of that is a very personal journey based on your own risk assessment for you and your culture and your industry. And so that's why it does matter a little bit. But in the end, like you're saying, I mean, in the end, we live in the world of results. And so, in the end, who the hell cares? But it is tricky from the keynote stage because they always frame it in terms of like AI did this, and then you peel it back and you're like, well, actually, I know you got this done 2 years ago when you standardized 3 different inventory systems into one, because I had a window into that project already, and I know that's what you did.
Yeah.
And so that's where the bulk of your savings came from. And by the way, gave you the opportunity for all the other agentic stuff you're doing now.
Right. Amen.
Amen. Before I send you into your well-deserved weekend, which hopefully will give you a lot of energy back that was sucked out of you in the last 2 weeks, let me ask one last question. It's a complex question containing 3 questions in itself. For one who wasn't at Sapphire, the one thing they should go investigate, one thing they should stop worrying about, and one thing they should watch closely in the next 6 months. Jon, you'll go first.
Oh my gosh. Investigate, stop worrying about, and watch closely in the next 6 months. Well, I think investigate, I'm gonna say really just dig into how these issues affect your job and your peers inside your industry. So if you're the CIO or on that team in the medical industry, like, study your industry peers and what's going on with them, and study your role-based peers and what's going on with them, and try to connect with them too if you can, either inside of SAP user groups or elsewhere, and really build that network. And that network is actually what allows you to better investigate, because, like, investigate this stuff full time, and it is exhausting. And you need shortcuts, and your shortcuts are your trusted network that you assemble around you. And hopefully it's diverse perspectives inside and outside the SAP ecosystem, because now is the wrong time for tunnel vision. So don't be tunnel vision. What were the next two? Sorry, that's the investigate.
And watch closely.
Oh, something you can ignore and something you got to watch closely.
Yeah.
Please try to ignore all the bullshit about job loss and all of that stuff, and that's happening, and that just take it on a more casual level with all of that. Like, just ignore the noise that you see on LinkedIn about AI just demolished this industry or this, the progress is coming relatively slowly in a lot of areas, and some of the vast steps that these companies took have slowed down a bit, and we're automating tasks more than we are jobs. And if you don't understand that distinction, think about how complex problem solving capabilities are important to most jobs and roles, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. I'm not saying that these things don't matter, but just try to ignore the ferocious tempo of it, at least, and take it on a more measured level inside your organization. In terms of something to watch, gosh, I think I would kind of watch the partner and customer communities going forward into the fall. Watch the blog posts that customers and partners make, and learn from them. And maybe you could track Josh and I a little bit too if you're in the mood, as well as Alexander. Listen to these episodes, because this is my favorite podcast to go on these days. So you need all of that as a continuous framework for your learning.
Okay, my shot. Investigate. I think that's always been the case, but now more than ever, really investigate the opportunities for consolidating and managing your data in a irrational way. Having an intelligent data strategy is absolutely essential, and always has been. but now more than ever. So really think about data as a fundamental aspect of strategy. I think is super, super important. Stop worrying. I was going to say, don't stop worrying about anything. I mean, never stop worrying is what I really meant to say. Is there's a lot to worry about in the world, and the world is a very complex place. And I think that it's more and more complex. I think, you know, so vigilance is really important. I like Jon. I like your example because I think there's a lot of BS out there that we can stop worrying about. But frankly, even then, even the sort of the job loss story has to be paid attention to, because someone's going to come up to you and pretend that that's a reality, and or should be a reality in your company, and you're going to need to be able to rebut it. So I think stop worrying never, um, and watch closely or keep an eye on. Um, I I guess I would keep an eye on the opportunity to collaborate. This thing I talked about before is really, there's more and more necessity. This is almost a big, deep philosophical, cultural story that we don't have room for, and this isn't the venue for. But we have a society and a business culture that's tending towards a dystopian fragmentation in so many levels. And what I love about going to whether it's a Sapphire which is dominated by mega corporations, or some of the smaller events Jon and I went to, one in particular, is looking at this idea that people in business do want to collaborate, they do want to work together, business to business. And I think we have to look for those opportunities internally as well as externally into our ecosystem. So how do we build better ecosystems? How do we enable a better environment for all of us to succeed in a rational way? I think that to me is a great sort of end point for this discussion. I'll stop there.
Absolutely. And if I may add one thing concerning the worrying part that Jon mentioned, Scott Galloway recently put let's say, the kind of panic into quite a good frame when he said, every generation had its machine takes our jobs moment. This one has just a bigger balance sheet. And I think this is quite a good way to cover that. And concerning the navigation, I think a very, very good way to navigate these kinds of uncertainties and future stuff are the either written or the spoken output by Josh Greenbaum and Jon Reed. And that's why.
And Alexander Greb, thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's why I definitely will put again everything where people can talk and meet with you and read about you and read your stuff and consume your knowledge and what you bring onto the table in the show notes. Where can people meet you in the next month before SAP Connect?
Well,
you better not. Yeah. Don't come looking for me. I'm buried.
Yeah, don't try to find Josh. Josh is in secret summer stealth mode.
No, I'm around. It's just not showing up at conferences.
Well, yeah, I mean in real time. Your chances to see me are dwindling, but if this podcast comes out pretty soon, you can catch me at Salesforce Connections in Chicago, and I may be at a Workday event in New York at the end of the month if you're so inclined. Otherwise, I'm going to be deep in the bunker here in Batcave research mode. But LinkedIn is always my love-hate experience where I am riding the viral waves I just criticized. And one of the big highlights on LinkedIn is comments and messages from thoughtful, discerning individuals, which is the main reason I'm still on that platform, is because there's a few of those that pop their heads up and make the whole day worthwhile amidst the noise. So find me there.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we will be quite quick. Maybe not Monday because Monday is a public holiday, but on Tuesday. And I'm really looking forward to all the great feedback to this great conversation. Gentlemen.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
Thanks.